In the 1960s, a child in rural Michigan heard about the concept of extraterrestrials. He thought about the possibility of life forms which had not originated on Earth, but somewhere out there in the vast cosmos. And the idea grabbed a hold of his imagination. Now, if you're like me, you often think of ETs in the midst of an array of cultural forms that surround us, either in popular fiction or in the various conspiracy theories. We think either of the terror of destruction and colonization from an external force far more advanced militarily than ourselves, or we think of Roswell and powerful government entities cribbing notes from these creatures and their technologies in order to replicate them and dominate the world. In the midst of this, it can be hard to get ourselves back to that sense of childlike wonder when talking about the possibility of life that had not originated on this planet. But John Shepard, the child in rural Michigan who was captivated by the thought of aliens, John was living at the beginning of this saturation of media stories about aliens, and perhaps because of that, he retained his awe of the thought of making contact with something out there. And John began to build a radio station pointed towards space. It started out small, just some electronic tone pulses sent out to space. But slowly, he began to construct something slightly bigger, slightly more powerful, slightly more complex. He had lived with his grandparents, and in their living room, he built a broadcast station to the stars. In the front of his house, he built a 2-story radio tower, which he constructed out of a dismantled ski lift. And the picture of this is phenomenal. His living room is filled with giant scientific displays in the background. And in the foreground, his grandmother sits knitting. By the mid-1970s, John was spending 4 hours a day broadcasting millions of miles into space and monitoring the stars for any return call. He would add to his equipment array and monitor the skies for the next 30 years. 4 hours a day of broadcast for 30 years. He called it terrestrial radio, and he would play what he called non-commercial music, including Afrobeat, gamelan, jazz, and so on. Now, John never claimed to have a return message from the aliens during that time. And in the 90s, John stopped broadcasting because it was no longer financially feasible to continue. John said of his experience, quote, "My interest is in finding out the unknown. And the unknown is just that, unknown. And you search and you continue searching because of your desire, because you know there's something there." Now, I don't know about you, but I heard that and said, yes, exactly that. Not about the aliens per se, but about our collective relationship with the unknown. And the more I sit with this story, the more I ask myself if John is simply a monk of the space age, and if his broadcasts are prayers to the unknown mystery of the universe. And when I say prayers, I don't mean in the sense of beseeching a higher power to intervene in the world's affairs. Prayer, to me, is talking to the unknown. We may talk to it with words, we may talk to it with music or action or dance, or in whatever way our imagination tells us the unknown may understand, may reveal itself. To me, prayer need not ask for anything at all. It is just an attempt to contact something that is beyond our current ability to communicate. So meditation is one form of prayer insofar as it communicates with that unknown within us, or connects us with that unknown around us. Divination, too, is a form of prayer in that what we ask questions of the unknown, and we attempt to discern the unknown from what is revealed. However, these traditional forms of religious observation need not confine prayer, just as science cannot contain the unknown. It always slips a little further beyond us. In our poem today, Ada Limon says, "Think of how far a voice must have to travel to go beyond the universe." John tried to amplify his voice beyond the universe. And if John's project seemed like a silly idea, like the delusions of a lonely man in rural Michigan, then I ask you to think about the Voyager program. We sent 2 interstellar probes into space, the furthest that we have ever sent any object. And on board those probes is a golden record, essentially a vinyl record, but made out of a more durable material. And on the record itself, there are musical tracks from all over the world. There are images, there are greetings. A physical record traveling into space to make contact with the unknown. And what is more interesting to me is not necessarily the contents of the record, but the cover of the record. On the cover, there are a number of pictures that are supposed to be instructions as to how to play the record that do not require language to understand it. It is an attempt to communicate with an unlanguageable unknown. And embedded on the surface of that record is a little packet of uranium that decays at a very stable rate, such that if any intelligent life form finds the golden record, they can measure how much time has elapsed since the record was produced to the time of its inception. It is essentially a radioactive timer. In 10,000 years, this record could be discovered somewhere in interstellar space. And the hope is that the creatures, with no idea of human language, well beyond the time that humans have departed this universe, that these creatures would find a way to play this record and find on it photographs of people licking ice cream or diagrams of human pregnancy. Our lonely little planet sent a probe into space with a few precious memories and some thoughts and prayers that an alien civilization would find it, understand the complex non-linguistic instructions, and discover the beauty that was Earth's civilization. So one lonely man in the woods of Michigan playing music into the vastness of space, and one lonely planet blasting a time capsule into that same vast mystery. Ada Limon in our poem today says she used to pretend to believe in God, mainly because she liked so much to talk to someone in the dark. So too, it seems, does the most powerful aerospace organization in history. Now, if talking to the unknown is not simply the purview of lonely people with an obsession with telemetry like John, it is also not simply a poetic or hopeful expression sent into space. Living in the nuclear age, we have accumulated a large amount of radioactive material that will be extraordinarily dangerous for thousands of years to come. Radioactive waste from both nuclear weapons production and nuclear energy is a huge problem, not just for us today, but in planning for the future, planning for the unknown future of human history. Now, there are many people trying to solve the problem of how we are to label dangerous nuclear waste, such that an explorer 10,000 years from now will recognize the danger. 10,000 years from now. See, now part of the problem is semantic shifts in symbology. I'll ask you to think, for instance, of the Jolly Roger flag, the skull and crossbones flag. We often associate this with Halloween, pirates, maybe some buried treasure. Just 150 years ago, that symbol was well known and feared. Its meaning was unambiguous. A very dangerous ship was coming to pillage your ship. A mere 150 years later, this same symbol does not cause fear and terror, but more so play and imagination. We put it on children's toys. And that's just 150 years of meaning shifting. Imagine what can change in a symbol in 1,000 years, or in 10,000 years. So some of the ideas include labeling nuclear waste with a comic book strip picture showing someone touching it and then dying. This assumes that people can read left to right, can understand causality between frames. Other ideas are altering the landscape to make large spikes and imposing, scary figures, like big sculptures that are meant to prey on humans' natural aversions to scary places. Now, when I hear this, I cannot help but think of some Aztec ruins or even the Great Pyramids. Would such architecture really warn people away, or would it call us forward with a desire to uncover the unknown? Just imagine the plagues and curses that our modern world could release on the far future. The process to effectively label nuclear hazards for an unknown future is ongoing, but the very process is itself a prayer to the unknown. It is a care for someone or something who is so far removed from us we can't even trust on shared language or symbols to communicate the danger. The person we are warning likely has the same basic bodies that we do, but culture is so fluid with time that these future people are effectively extraterrestrials insofar as we are concerned. Now, these three examples are rather large scale, and that's intentional. The clearest examples are also the most extreme. They all share something in common. They are non-theistic attempts to communicate meaningfully with beings that we do not currently know, and which we do not know if will ever exist or receive our broadcast. Each of them have a bit of whimsy and a practical purpose. And I think most importantly, each recognizes the constitutive mystery of our world and tries to meet that mystery as mystery itself. These are no missions of conquest. These are not attempts to resolve the unknown by turning it into the known. In short, each of these uses science, but each is not itself a scientific endeavor. And this, to me, is the heart of spiritual life. We are surrounded by the unknown, be it the spatial unknown as what lurks in the deeps of the ocean or out there in the beyond, or the temporal unknowns as in what's going to happen tomorrow, and the existential unknowns in death and dying. These mysteries do not require faith to uphold them or science to confirm them. These mysteries are the very nature of the experience of this universe. Indeed, sometimes it can feel like the known is swaddling clothes to protect us from the unknown. Now, one of the acknowledged sources of the UU faith is, and I'm going to quote, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. I think it is this which draws me closest to UUism more than even the principles and the other sources, more than the hymnal and the justice work. Well, maybe co-equal with the hymnal and the justice work. Too often, we can feel like spiritual and religious experience was something from the far past, something pre-scientific, and thus not entirely relevant to our experience now. Or perhaps it is entirely relevant because it continues to capture our soul thousands of years later. But I would argue that so long as the unknown surrounds us and mystery persists as part of our collective experience, then so too does new forms of spiritual life and religious experience. A probe sent to space with an album of Javanese music, Johnny B. Good and Beethoven, is right now traveling through interstellar space. In 300 years, it will be past the Oort belt outside of our solar system, and it will continue to travel into the future so far away that it may be the only remnant of this big blue planet years in the future. That, to me, is every bit a religious experience as the many pages of our ancient scripture. Our spiritual life is generative, it is alive, it keeps a connection with the unknown, and because of that, it is forever renewed. All of us have a connection with the mystery that surrounds us. It is vital to our spiritual lives that we cultivate that relationship. It need not be a grand gesture. I'm not saying you need to go home and build a radio tower to broadcast to space. But I ask us all to think about those moments when we talk to the unknown, not expecting a response, and being transformed by the very act of it. I think keeping a diary is a form of talking to the unknown. I think that pulling a tarot card is. I think standing in a lawn surrounded by lightning bugs just to feel what they might feel as they pulse, calling out for connection in a large world whose darkness threatens to consume them. Find mystery, find the unknown, and talk to it. Broadcast your heart to space without expecting an answer. Adelie Mome tells us that she relied on a miracle fish once to tell her her fortune, but that was before she knew that it was her body's water which moved it, what she calls that massive ocean inside of us, which makes the fish swim. May our internal oceans make the fish swim. May we be one light of many pulsing in the darkness. And may we lean over the edge of earth in wonder and cast our questions into the deep.